Señoras y señores, tengo el gran honor de saludar la participación a nuestra conferencia del profesor José Luis de la Cuesta, presidente de la Asociación Internacional de Derecho Penal. La presencia de su señoría a nuestra reunión expresa las buenas relaciones entre la Asociación y los especialistas humanos en derecho penal. Al mismo tiempo, se continúan las tradiciones, podría decir mejor, históricas entre la Asociación Internacional de Derecho Penal y los juristas de Romania. Es suficiente recordar el hecho de que entre las fundadoras de la asociación se encuentra el profesor Vespasian Pepela, que llegó a ser el presidente de esta entre los años 1946 y 1952. Les ruego que me permitan ofrecerle la palabra al señor profesor y presidente de la esta, presidente de la Asociación Internacional de Derecho Penal.
Muchísimas gracias, señor presidente. Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to be here with you in the Academy of Science in order to take part in this conference on the new criminal law, tradition, modification, reform, and judicial progress. And it's especially a highest honor to be the follower of the successor of Professor Vespasian Pepela. I am the president of the International Association of Penal Law, and Vespasian Pepela was the president of our association. For us, President Pepela was a very important personality in the life of the association. He was not 27 years old when he went to Paris in 1922 and 24 to take part of the law faculty in the meeting that decided the establishment of the International Association of Penal Law. In this meeting, President Carton de Piar was elected president, but Pepela was already taken a position of vice president inside the association. The efforts of Vespasian Pepela towards the unification of penal law became one of the first purposes of the association since the beginning. In this sense, he was already very much engaged in the preparation of the first Congress of the association in Brussels, where the International Bureau towards the unification of penal law was already proposed, and a unanimous vote in this sense was adopted. Also in Warsaw in 1927, in the Conference for the Unification of Penal Law, Vespasian Pepela was very active and mainly or particularly in the conference in Rome in 1928, when he became the vice president of the conference, and he was elected the Secretary General of the Permanent Bureau that organized 8 international conferences. The position, the presence of the activity of Professor Vespasian Pepela was also of very, very high importance in around the establishment of the International Criminal Court. He took part very actively in the drafting of the Geneva Convention on International Terrorism, and in this convention, a document, a special part concerning the International Criminal Court was already also adopted. And in the ADP, he was, of course, one of the organizers of the different congresses. One of the first congresses of the association was held here in Bucharest in 1929, and he became president in 1946 after the first president of the association, Carton de Piar. He was the organizer of the Congress of 1948 in Geneva. That was the 4th International Congress of the Association, and when he went to New York and took part in the United Nations, he was the one who got the recognition of the association of the IDP as nations. Because of this, our association has a medal, a special medal that we call Vespasian Penale. This medal was given by Mrs. Penale to Benjamin Friends in 1958 as a special award, APP award. Each recipient must be recognized with this, medal as a champion of international criminal justice, and takes the medal during 10 years, and then he decided to which personality the medal is going to be given after this 10 years mandate among the members of the association. The recipients of the medals until now were friends, Basuni and Chavas, and here you can see the transmission of the medal that was done in Siracusa, in the Institute, the Institute of Criminal Sciences in Siracusa. Basuni is given to Professor Chavas the Vespasian Penale. But well, we are here in order to talk around the new criminal law, the Romanian new criminal law, and I would like to address you some short comments on this general topic, but asking for comprehension, because I have not been able to read it to code. I have not found an English version, and the ability of some colleagues have allowed me to know certain aspects of the text. So I'm going to make general considerations, and maybe some details will be also commented concerning the regulation of the code. Codification is an idea. We all know that codification is a way, or it's a method in order to try to assure that the legislation is going to be rational. And rationality in legal legislation should be the result of the dynamic process that comes from the drafting of the text through the deliberation to the majority that should approve our legal texts, and that need also the process that needs also to incorporate the evaluation of the results of the application of the legal norms. Of course, in order to assure rationality, the interpretation of the law of the legal text is fundamental, and there the dogmatic and argumentation take a very important position. But I insist that in order to assure rationality, monitoring the application, evaluating the application, having then an orientation towards the consequences of the norms that have been approved is a very, very important approach. Obviously, the legal norms are the result of a legal policy, and obviously the penal norms are the result of the penal policy. The penal policy should be especially reinforcing the constitutional principles, the constitutional provisions, and it's very important that the legal norms respect the principle of democracy. I have already talked about the importance of having a reinforced majority behind a criminal code. But very, very often we make a concerted confusion between the legal policy, penal policy, and criminal policy. And I think it's very important to have in mind what the founder of the International Union of Penal Law, that was the predecessor of the International Association of Penal Law, said about the criminal policy that was not confused with penal policy. Criminal policy tries to study the phenomenon and tries to establish or to adopt or to propose the measures that are needed in order to prevent criminality, in So, first elements in the criminal policy should be what Professor Penale, President of the International Society of Criminology, called the three levels of the criminological interpretation: the criminality, the crime, and the criminal. And these three levels in the criminal policy should be completed also by the position of the victims, the needs of the victims. The victimology shows us how the victimization is also a process that needs to be studied at the same level as the criminalization process, and also the monitoring and evaluation of the social evaluation that follows the commission of certain crimes. Well, in this frame, the main principles of the penal policy could be explained as I tried to project in the slide. Penal policy should always respect the idea of necessity and proportionality. This is a general idea, not a particular one for the penal policy, it's for any policy. Should always respect these two ideas. But these two principles, necessity and proportionality, have a very important influence, or should have a very important influence in all the levels of the penal policy. Of course, the main purposes of the penal policy is protection. It's the protection of legal values. Here, it's very important to know who is going to define these values, which are the levels of aggression that justify the penal intervention. The penal intervention, we will say, should be inspired by the principle of ultima ratio, by the public interest, and this makes the intervention of the penal law appear as a fragmentary intervention. Concerning penal responsibility, juridical safety requires that the principle of legality and the penal warranties are perfectly respected. But when we talk about penal responsibility, we frequently say that it must be the responsibility by the fact and not by the way of being, subjective responsibility, not by the result itself, but by the behavior that has produced the result, and a personal responsibility, because culpability is also a main pillar when we talk about the penal responsibility. So we could say that departing from this idea, the definition of the criminal act as an typical act, unjustified and guilty, is an adequate definition. And finally, I would say that for me, the principles of the penal policy should also incorporate the principle of humanity. Professor Geshe, who is also president of the International Association of Criminal Law, talked about this important principle. This important principle not only in the field of punishments, this is a field where normally the principle of humanity is developed, but also concerning the idea of culpability. If we consider persons from a humane point of view, probably we should establish a responsibility on freedom, of the idea of freedom, and not on the prevention itself. This idea of culpability of humanity is also very important in connection with the treatment of juveniles and in the regulation of the treatment of the approach towards victims. Well, the new Romanian criminal code establishes certain targets, main targets of the task. The law was adopted, as far as I have read, with certain doubts from the democratic point of view because of the procedure that was followed idea of technical improvement of the penal legislation was, of course, a first idea, a principal idea that must appear in any codification effort, building a coherent legislative framework, avoiding the overlapping with the special legislation, simplifying the legislation in order to facilitate the quick and military enforcement of course main purposes and rational purposes, and no question of these purposes could be done. Respecting the constitutional principles and compromises, international compromises, is also one of the purposes of the new penal code, and harmonizing and learning from comparative law, assuring acknowledgement and trust, and comparative and taking advantage of the results of the comparative criminal law is also one of the other elements that are evoked by the code itself. Chemical issues, I have read an article from these Romanian professors, and I have seen that there are several aspects of the technical approach that are considered susceptible of different critiques. Well, I am not going to enter in a lot of details, but I find that the very interesting provisions are those concerning the idea of favorability and regulating also the consequences of the unconstitutional situations. For instance, we don't have this kind of provisions in Spain. The regulation of the universal jurisdiction, linking it with the international engagement appear to be also very interesting, although the requirement of the voluntary presence of the person in the Romanian territory would be a way of limiting very, very much of the possibilities of application of the universal jurisdiction. I find also very interesting that the code contains the criminal liability of the legal persons, and also already introduced before in the Romanian legislation. This time we have just introduced it in the last 2 years ago. We have only 1 year and several months of experience in this field, and we are still dispassionate on the consequences, on the extent, and on the interpretation of several provisions that have been introduced by the criminal code, but we fear that are going to show really the results that were pursued. Concerning the theory of the penal infraction, this idea of material definition of the crime, mentioning the not justification and the guilty element and the imputability appears to be very coherent with the present level of the dogmatic. I have found that the definition of commission by omission is very close to the Spanish one, and well, I think that is a good definition, the one that was introduced in Spain. And there are other elements that keep your discussions, and probably we'll continue discussing them today about the attempt, about the continuity offences, the way of regulating the concurrence of offences. One of the purposes of the new criminal code was to assure the international engagements. One of the main international engagements now is the Statute of the International Criminal Court, and the European Code is of course taking care of the core crimes of international criminal law, even if aggression it's not yet perfectly enforced in the Roman Statute, even if aggression is not considered among these core crimes and is regulated in another part in the criminal code. One thing that probably surprises one who reads it is the question of the punishment that is provided for genocide until 25 years, and that respects no adequate comparison special protected person that can go until 30 years. Of course, international compromises are not only those contained in the Rome Testament, but there are many other international instruments that have been established in the field of law. As you know, Professor Tassioni, when he talks about international crimes, says, well, there are core international crimes, but there are many other instruments that are being reflected in many other criminal phenomena that are already regulated at the international level. He talks about 300 penal instruments in international at the international level, but there are several of these phenomena are the ones who are much more regulated by the international community. We could say that terrorism, organized crime, illicit trafficking of different kinds, and particularly trafficking persons, corruption, cybercrimes are really the most important fields of intervention according from to the idea of the globalization of the penal system. Well, I know that the code has, of course, different provisions concerning all of these elements, and I have read the report of the Greco Group on corruption that says that the Romanian legislation is quite adequate concerning the penal provisions relating to corruption. Also, the European Union criminal policy has something to do in this field of respecting international compromises. If the European Union was not established with penal competences early, this lack of competences was noticed as a problem for the European Union, and progressively we have witnessed a development of the European Union towards a certain European Union criminal law. The institutional conflict that was experienced in the level of protection of the environment allowed the directives to enter in a field that was until then the field exclusive field for the framework decisions. But after Lisbon, the directives can intervene directly in the harmonization and establishment of minimum elements for the infractions and for the sanctions for several topics that are projected in the slide that I'm not going to read. In any case, all of these provisions must, of course, be progressively translated to the internal legislation, and must be adopted by the penal code itself. The idea of harmonizing the national legislation with the elements of the comparative law appears to be a very interesting one. And the fact that I see that the drafting of the penal code has taken into account the information and the elements coming from France, from Spain, from Germany, from Portugal, from Italy, is for me a very, very interesting one. If I look at these different countries, these are for us in the continental field, the countries whose legislation are always references when we talk about the criminal laws. Spain also should have taken more into account other countries that we mentioned here, and really we have not done it when we adopted our new code. In any case, key rules for equality in comparative work, according to Françoise Duquesne, she's a professor at the Université Catholique de Louvain, but now she's a magistrate at the European Courts of Human Rights, could be departing from a real problem, from the theoretical one, from the concept, studying all the foreign law and not only certain elements. We need to understand the ensemble of the foreign law, not only part of it, confronting the juridical solutions, taking into account the legal texts and jurisprudence, putting them out in their context, modesty should be one of the most important features of the comparative work. In the case I have said that for me it's important also to take into account the principle of humanity. The principle of humanity has a very important reflect in punishments. I see that in your legislation has a life imprisonment, and life imprisonment, maybe I'm wrong, but I have read that is more or less, it cannot be suspended only for reasons of age. It will be suspended when the sentence were completed will be 60, probably it will be possible to suspend. I am really against life imprisonment. Life imprisonment is going to be now introduced in Spain. We have a very important debate on it. We have already 30 years, even 40 years of imprisonment. I think that it's already enough to have these very long prison sentences. Very long prison sentences that sometimes in certain countries, like in Spain, can be followed by security questioning. So can have a longer time of control by the penal system, by the way of this permanent. I don't think that life imprisonment can be conciliated with resocialization, but in Spain is constitutionally the most important orientation of the prison. And for me, really, it would be very important to control very much the possibility of intervention if life imprisonment is going to be adopted in Spain. I think that it should be very well controlled and submitted to real possibilities of suspending it when the evolution in the penitentiary treatment allows the authorities to decide that this imprisonment is not yet changes have been introduced to allow a different consideration of the situation that was considered by the sentence. A very important element, and I am finishing my intervention, is the treatment of minors of age. I see that the treatment that you do, this treatment in the penal code, for me, it's not the best solution for me. The special act concerning juveniles would be much better solution, because finally, even if the juveniles can be responsible, I am convinced that they can be responsible and they should be recognized as responsible when they have committed an offense, knowing that they were doing it, even if this is the case. After this declaration of responsibility, all the interventions should be inspired by completely different principles than those that are applied when we are talking of adults. And in this sense, having a special act, a special legislation, particular legislation, allows or permits a broader field in order to introduce this kind of specialties that must be present concerning juveniles. And finally, it's fundamental also that our criminal codes, and this problem is also a problem for the Spanish criminal code, introduce more and more considerations on the victims. Not only for establishing or adopting provisions concerning the assistance and the protection of victims, that of course must be done, and probably also there we need a special legislation concerning protection and assistance of victims. And not only assuring from a procedural point of view that there will be presence and certain protagonism of victims also in the penal procedures. But taking into account also the victim's interest when we are talking about offences, when we are talking about the responsibility, concepts as vulnerability, precipitation that have been already very much developed by technology can have important reflects in the penal legislation. establish provisions in legislation. Sanctions should be always also oriented towards victim protection, not only to punishment, but also when we can choose among different punishments, the idea of victims protection should be one of the leading ideas in order to decide if we are going to impose this sanction, this punishment, or another. And restorative justice, that is also justice, that is full justice, that's not the second way of justice, that can assure really the real and the adequate answer to the offences, and very often can satisfy much more the interests of victims should progressively have a presence in the penal system as a good answer to victimization, as a good answer also to the punitive demands generated by the criminal offences. In this sense, developing mediation, as Professor Tony Peters said, Professor Tony Peters was president of the International Society of Criminology and the left us this year, and taking into account that reconciliation, and I know that you all talks about reconciliation can be also important in order to show an adequate administration of the criminal justice. Well, these were for me the elements that I wanted to evaluate you in this introduction to your interesting conference. I wish you the best success in the conference, and I thank you very much.
fost președinte al Asociației și fondator al dreptului internațional penal, arhitect al unei